Welcome to today's casual retrosynthetic analysis. Today our target molecule is this quinazoline derivative that we have here on screen. I will not attempt to butcher that name, but this is a cancer medication that is used to treat lung cancer here in the States. We'll start about this retrosynthetic disconnection. We'll start here with this carbon-nitrogen bond, which will break our target molecule into two relatively smaller substituents that we can go ahead and do more analysis on. The first is this aniline derivative, and what we notice is this meta type of relationship. So likely we need something that is electron donating to direct to that meta position. So we'll go ahead and do some analysis on that in a moment. But then we have this quinazoline. This ring system here will be very fun to make. What we can see is these two sorts of imine type bonding patterns here. So likely we'll need some sort of ring formation, more likely onto that benzene substituent there with these ether type connections. And then, more than likely I'll abbreviate these as OR going forward. From here we would need this chlorine there, and that chlorine is gonna allow us going forward to that we would do a nucleophilic aromatic substitution type reaction, specifically the addition elimination pathway. So the lone pair on that nitrogen, just reach out to the carbon there and attack it, and go ahead and just give us our product at the end after deprotonation. So we'll call this 1 and we'll call this fragment 2. So we're going to start with fragment 1. From fragment 1, we have very limited options. We can definitely start from aniline, but I think that would present some issues with the forward synthesis, especially putting this CC triple bond in the right position. That screams some acetylation, nucleophilic aromatic substitution. So if we break that bond right there, what we'll end up with is our aniline, and we need some way of getting that back on there, and this is NAS, but instead of the addition elimination pathway, we want to force it to go through a more classic elimination addition benzyne type of intermediate. The problem is that at this point that'll just crash out our synthesis, our actual yield. But for today's conversation, it's more so about just exploring the chemistry. Specifically, that quinazolone ring will be very, very fun to make in future steps. So one thing here, we can, if we go back and oxidize that nitrogen into its nitro form, we can it'll be much easier to put the acetylide ion where we want it to go. So going from here this way is just reduction chemistry, and we'll explore that in the forward synthesis. But from here, this is about enough to, start our forward synthesis for fragment 1, but we'll come back to that at the end. So here's our quinazoline substituent. And I think a great place to start our initial disconnection is this specific imine type bond. And if we draw out what we would have, it will hopefully be a little bit clear as to why. Breaking that bond will leave us with something that looks like this, and there's a lot going on, so let's try to approach it a little bit slower and just kind of talk about the chemistry. So going forward, we would probably just need a pH of about 6-ish or so. What we would be doing is an imine formation, specifically the lone pair here, going over to do the imine formation there, which will add to that pi star system once that carbonyl gets protonated. My only issue here, going forward, I believe that this chlorine will end up leaving as a leaving group once we form that imine, but just for this, we'll assume that it'll stay on there. But yeah, sound off in the comments. I'm fairly certain that if we actually did that in the lab, that chlorine would not be there. So, suggest another disconnection. Let's see what else we can come up with for this forward synthesis. So here, another bond to break would be that second imine bond there. We know how to form that fairly easily. So let's leave this acid chloride looking species, and we'll break this. Didn't even do the disconnection. We'll break that. So that should leave us with this aniline type substituent here, and our amide that I don't really see, formamide. I don't really see this very often. But as you can see, there are a couple little things that we need to look out for. The imine here can, the amide can form an imine here, given the right conditions. And, the conditions would favor, or would be for, imine formation. We wouldn't really be able to do much there unless we add a protecting group, so, which also presents issues in the sense that, first what I would do is in a flask chuck that in there, as well as our protecting group agent, something like this dial here. So we, in theory, we have our acid and our diol, as well as this benzyl, this aniline type substituent, and then from there, this would get protonated and go through the whole mechanism to form that protecting group. And then in the second step 2 is when we chuck in this amide. So that would give us the right selectivity for this aniline to go ahead and form an imine with that amide, the formamide. So that'll definitely, adding extra steps, we'll go ahead and address that in the forward synthesis when we get there. So now from here, classic disconnections, we can pop that off and, do a little Friedel-Crafts acylation. And I did not even add these OR groups, so let's go ahead and add them, and we'll address that as well here in a moment. But yeah, from here, we'll break that carbonyl bond to the benzene ring. That'll leave us. See, I'll do the ORs first so I don't forget them. As well as this aniline here. Yeah, so adding that, we see who is the most electron donating, I should say, from this nitrogen lone pair or one of these oxygen lone pairs. And classically, let's explore this idea a little bit. I just drew out a couple resonance structures, and again, very casual. I just drew the delocalized electrons within the benzene ring system. But from here, one thing that we can see is that whenever those lone pair electrons are donated in, we see that the nitrogen and oxygen both form charged species, and nitrogen has a little bit more electropositivity than oxygen, and of these two, this should win out, which is very helpful. That nitrogen bearing that positive charge, it's more likely to be the electron donating group into that benzene system. So that'll make our aniline substituent the directing substituent. So from there, we can, going this way, we just bring in our Friedel-Crafts acylation component, and it'll be something like this. I believe this will get us there, in our Lewis acid, something like that. The only issue here is that this amine will react with that Lewis acid. It'll act as a Lewis base, donate its lone pair in a sort of coordination type of reaction. But at this point, I think exploring the forward synthesis might help give some good ideas as to how to pop these groups on there while directing to where we need to go. So from here, the forward synthesis for fragment 1 starts out with a benzene ring, very easily accessible. You can distill it from gas, wouldn't recommend that. But this nitration, just having to watch out for our stoichiometry, but that'll add this nitro group. From here, we need to add a chlorine onto here to set us up for our nucleophilic aromatic substitution. So at this point, before I reduce that nitro, I think it's a good idea to bring in our chlorine, because that nitrogen, its lone pair is not available to react with our iron 3 chloride species, and it'll direct it to where we need it to go. It'll direct meta. From here, we can do classic reduction chemistry. Personally, I would go with hydrazine. Use a base and heat, and that will the thought there is that it'll selectively reduce just the nitro group to our aniline product while leaving that chlorine there. So from here, just do classic nucleophilic aromatic substitution, acetylide in acetylide ion. That's an awful acetylide. And from here, this is where we will end up with 3 products, if I'm not mistaken. And separating them will not be as fun as I'd like it to be. But ultimately, we have our product. Please suggest what else we can do here to get that acetylide para to our nitrogen, while also not really bothering that lone pair. So fragment 2 is where we get to talk a little bit about ring formation reactions. For this forward synthesis, just to save some steps, I decided to start at phenol. You can go through benzene as well and make a diazonium salt, and then go ahead and make your phenol from that. The phenol is very easily accessible, and it'll give us a little bit of that directing action that we need. So first step is very similar to the above, a classic nitration. Just gotta make sure that we're at one equivalent of our reactants, just to get that singular nitro group on there. We will end up with, again, 2 products here, but ultimately all we are really looking for is this para product. We will get the ortho product, but we're not really interested in that here. So once you go through and you grab your isolated product, do something a little different. First, here, sulfonation, classic. We already have half the acid lying around from the previous reaction, so we'll go ahead and just sulfonate, and that'll get us exactly where we want. This group here will be meta to the phenol. Or I'm sorry, not meta. That's ortho. What am I talking about? Here is a interesting reaction. I do not fully know the mechanism, but according to my textbook, if you add sodium hydroxide and do an acid workup, you will turn that sulfate into another phenol. That is so crazy. Now, like I said, I don't really understand that mechanism, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's not going to do anything to our other hydroxyl and nitro substituent on this benzene. But if you know a little bit more, sound off, tell me, let me know if I'm doing something that is incorrect here. So, our next step. These phenols have a pKa of around 10, and we're going to go ahead and take advantage of that. It's an awful A. We'll add something like this, a nitrogen-based base and table salt. And our table salt will provide our counter ions. Essentially what this will do is deprotonate both of those phenols and set us up for the next step. So from here, we're gonna add something a little creative. It's gonna be a 1-iodo 2-methoxyethane. Crazy name. Let's go. It's O right there. 2 carbons for the ethane. It's got an iodo and a methoxy on there. For here, we're gonna add 2 equivalents of this. So let's explore this a little bit more in depth. The reason I chose this iodo species is because this bond here specifically is very long, not held on very tightly. So once this, phenoxy substituent comes here, it can do an SN2 type reaction where it'll attack there and kick out that iodine. And we're doing that twice. That's why there's the two equivalents, and that will throw on those ether type connections on there. But in reality, SN type reactions are some of the worst to do. We don't want to try to add to that sigma star. That sigma star, it's just not very susceptible to overlap with our HOMO electrons. But again, sound off. What else would you do here to add these groups onto that, specifically where we want to go? From here we can start forming our quinazolene ring. So from this nitro substituent, the last piece before we actually build that quinazolene system is going to be the addition of this dichlorine carbonyl sort of compound. Truthfully, I don't know if this will work. Same as earlier, I think this should work, but go ahead and sound off. This species is probably very unstable. I would not like to work with that at all, if it is even stable. But from these oxygens here will be our directors. What we need specifically is this to go right here. And fortunately enough, that will be one of our products. This oxygen at the top that is para to the nitro group will direct our carbonyl chlorine to go right there, which will set us up for our ring formation a little bit later. So from here, next step is protecting that carbonyl. We'll go ahead and use that diol that I suggested earlier. Just honestly, it's such a cool looking structure after, if I'm gonna be completely honest. That's really the only reason I use it. You can do whatever to protect that. But yeah, we'll go ahead and finish that up. Too far on that. And again, this chlorine being on there is highly unlikely. If I'm gonna be completely honest, at this point, that would not be the reaction that goes on. If we replace that with something else, putting that chlorine back onto that quinazolene system will be very difficult. So please sound off. What should we replace this chlorine with here? Either way, we will just be pushing forward with this retrosynthesis. forward at this point. But from here, we can go ahead and reduce that nitro group, and I'll just put the symbol there, likely the same reduction we did in the earlier step of our synthesis. And we are almost there. From here, this is where we start getting into some really fun chemistry. First, we're gonna form an imine. We're gonna have formamide, and we're gonna use that as our ketone our carbonyl that we're going to go ahead and turn into an amide. So from here, again, we need a pH of about 6, which will form this product here. So I'm going to kind of jack it up. We'll just call this R prime for now. We'll call this still OR. From here, this will now have a different structure. It'll be this imine that we formed that has this nitrogen, right? Comes from here. That's right there. Perfect. Now we will go ahead and cyclize. This is our ring formation. So I'm just going to redraw this just to make it a little bit easier to see what we're about to do. We'll go ahead and just say that in this step we deprotected that ketone. I don't know why I keep calling it a ketone. It's not a ketone. The carbonyl. So now we have this. Again, assuming that chlorine stuck around, which is highly unlikely. From here, we can see that this nitrogen seems to be in a good setup to form an imine right here. And according to Baldwin's rules, this is a 6-exo trig type of ring formation, which is favored. And that's what's leading me to believe that so long as everything goes right, we will have our quinazoline ring at the end. So now, just standard imine formation conditions will get us the ring we're looking for, which will look something like this. Now, again, we assumed, and I'm going to continue to assume, that this chlorine here is going to stay there. But like I keep saying, the likelihood is low. It is a good leaving group. The only problem is that doing a functional group interconversion there, I ran out of ideas. But from here, we're basically there. We just bring this with our other starting material that we had made, which was this aniline with this acetylide meta, and then H2. And then from here, we have our final product, this quinazoline, I should say. I'll just go ahead and just connect them right here. We'll just say that that's an appropriately length bond. But yeah, essentially we are done. Again, this is only paper chemistry. This is only for educational purposes. I hope you have had an enjoyable time working through this synthesis. The American healthcare system is a mess. It's a joke. Truthfully, it's not for people. This is for people. I am not recommending that you make your own medications at home. It's never going to end well. But ultimately, arming people with knowledge is always going to end up being the right thing to do. So thank you for coming to our little educational talk. Hope you have a wonderful day.